the judge who took the plea?
I believe it was Commissioner Bianco.
All right? That would be a little bit unusual.
And the motion is to revoke bond on Mr. Rubin.
Welcome, I'm Craig X.
Google searches are also getting higher lately for Temple 420.
We put up a photograph of him holding what appears to be marijuana.
Well, the group was founded by some guy named Craig X.
The next mayor of the city of Los Angeles.
What were they saying?
Mr. Rubin continues to distribute marijuana, according to the article, 6 days a week since his arrest.
But as it turns out, Craig X is not just some guy. Visit craigx.com.
And this photograph is dated by the paper last Friday, at which time Mr. Rubin was out on bond.
Work with us and help us end this horrible prohibition on the sacred plant.
Craig X, you ask? That's right. I've dropped the slave name. I'm fighting the system. I'm for freedom, independence, and liberty. I am a marijuana expert. My film, The Temple 420 Story, We'd Like to Win, is about trying to win public opinion. Because I'm a convicted felon, I was convicted for starting a church and trying to teach people about the Bible, the Old and New Testament.
A local pastor is preaching the benefits of pot to his followers, but now this marijuana ministry is facing the wrath of county prosecutors.
One look at this storefront in West Los Angeles and you know you're looking at a marijuana dispensary. This one, Cooley says religion is just another way dope dealers try to get around the law to make a profit.
I think they're frauds and they're corrupt and they should be pursued by those in positions of law enforcement authority.
That's what happened at Pastor Craig Rubin's dispensary. After an undercover investigation, LA police raided the place on October 22nd at 4:20 in the afternoon.
Provided medical marijuana to people and actually burned cannabis in our Friday night ceremonies. We sold marijuana 6 days a week, every day except the Sabbath, because we didn't want to do business on the Sabbath. We did have services on the Sabbath. We did the Old Testament on Saturday, the New Testament on Sunday. Our church, our temple, was featured in Doug Benson's film, Super Jaime.
If you've never been to our temple before, we'll just let you know we're a Judeo-Christian temple. You happen to be on Saturday, so we have the Old Testament Jewy thing going on. You come back tomorrow, you got the New Testament, all right? So feel free to come back any day. Services are always at 4:20.
I was just thinking of the Union. I've been in a lot of marijuana films. I was on the TV show Weeds, where I played the owner of the Medical Marijuana Club.
A combination of our patients themselves and some very compassionate farmers doing God's work.
And it's all legal.
Well, we operate under the guidelines of Health and Safety Code 11362.5. And in Revelation it talks about a plant for the healing of all nations, which cannabis is. So, we're selling weed for the Lord on Hollywood Boulevard. All right, welcome to Temple 420 services today. Everyone, Doug Benson was on Last Comic Standing, and we invited him to come the other evening to our comedy, but he wasn't sure because he doesn't fully believe in God. So he's here to come to the services and check out Temple 420, our 420 services.
So this guy has services every Saturday and Sunday at 4:20. Right, and we went today, and I brought like 3 or 4 friends, and then there were some children running around, and a couple other dudes.
The Hollywood minister who says marijuana is holy will stand trial for felony charges of possession and selling. A judge determined today the case against the Reverend Craig X. Rubin will go forward, and the minister will be able to use freedom of religion as his defense. Rubin heads Temple 420 and says cannabis is the tree of life mentioned in the Bible and that burning it is a sacrament. He says his religious rights have been violated.
I'm on probation for having started my temple. I was arrested and convicted of 5 years in prison. But, and I call this my Jew paper, even though my dad gets upset because our family's Jewish. but I'm not allowed to leave my house without this paper. It says I'm on probation for selling and furnishing marijuana, and I have to call in nightly and be drug tested. And this is also my probation papers and my convicted drug papers. But right here it says the court grants the defendant's request to own and operate a marijuana facility. And so I have a church again where I sell medical marijuana again for spiritual purposes. I now just have to be piss tested. They seized my life savings. We lost our house. Our cars were repossessed. No, God does everything for a reason, and life has gotten better. I'm working again. I have a medical marijuana club again called the Beverly Hills Green Cross. I'm teaching the word to people, which is really nice. Because when it first happened, I thought one thing. And then as we were able to recover the video, and I was able to watch the video for 16 different camera angles, the whole 10 or 12 hours beforehand, I realized how much bigger it was. I mean, we had some of our vendors, guys who were selling us cannabis, medicinal marijuana, who actually seemed to be working with the government, and there was more than one of them, which was really amazing to me.
For the next 3 minutes, you're going to see the power of 16 camera coverage. That's Brett Bogue, myself, and Robert Ayala's walking out to the car. He's the one with the pushed up sleeves the camera's going to follow as he goes down to the undercover police cars to get the marijuana that Temple 420 was busted with. On that day, November 8, 2006, I bought $10,000 worth of marijuana from Brett Bogue and Robert Ayala, and I guess the undercover police officers too, who were both LAPD officers and DEA agents. If you'll notice, my camera can follow Robert anywhere he goes across every angle of the parking lot. He's currently heading to the southeast corner of the parking lot where 2 undercover police cars are parked along with several police officers. They're going to pull out a duffel bag out of the back of the car and hand him 25 pounds of marijuana. He's going to return to the temple and offer to front us 25 pounds of marijuana. On that date, I had requested only that Brett Bogue bring me 3 pounds of marijuana, and I had agreed to pay him $10,000. And that's exactly what we bought, 3 pounds of marijuana, and we paid him $10,000, for which we wrote a check, because at our legal marijuana dispensary, we were dotting our I's and crossing our T's and paying for our marijuana suppliers, or our marijuana supply, with checks so as not to be considered money launderers. We were doing everything by the book because we didn't want to break the law. So now Robert Ayala is going to walk back into the temple carrying a duffel bag with 25 pounds of marijuana, and he's going to make a deal with my associate Adam, who worked behind the green door. He was a manager. He was a great guy. Unfortunately, he got arrested too. Thank goodness all of his record was cleared and dropped. Notice the time on the upper right hand side. Even when the camera changes, the time stays the same. The camera could follow him everywhere he goes, and that's why I'm showing this clip right here at the beginning, to let you know that I have full coverage and knowledge of who was on the property that day until the very end of the day when the police destroyed the cameras. And what he'll do now is walk into the gift shop of the church or the temple, and there was a gift shop prior to going into the sanctuary. Robert is carrying the duffel bag full of 25 pounds of marijuana, and it was mostly grape ape. That's the specific genetic strain that Brett Bogue and Apothecary strains through Gecko University have created. Brett is famous for being the official travel agency for High Times magazine. I met Brett through my brother, who had a business in Holland. Brett also had a business in Europe, Canada, California, Oregon, Washington. He's one of the few reliable people that I found in the marijuana business. I called him Rockstar because he claimed he was a drug dealer, and he claimed that he brought in tons of marijuana from Canada to the United States, distributed all over, and he always kept his word to me. And I had asked him to bring down marijuana. This was the first time I decided to ever do business with him, because I called him Rockstar. I thought he was reckless, and you can see he's flailing his arms around. At one point he looks like he's going to point a gun at me. But I liked Brett until this day. I mean, even after this day, until I went through these videos a few months later and figured out he was actually working with the police, or was a cop. But here's the video, so you decide. I'm going to just put the facts out there and you judge for yourself. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, you see we've sped the video up here. For Weeds fans, if you'll notice in the background is a dry erase board, which is we called the big board. That's what I was showing Nancy Bottenwin in the show Weeds when she first walked in the Medical Marijuana Club. What was I saying? Oh yeah. Anyways, just a little trivia.
how I see it for you there in California, and Roger Christie in Hawaii, and my situation with the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church, and I'll just throw Eddie Lepp in there too.
Eddie Lepp is a friend of mine from Northern California who's now serving time in jail. These are the type of people American taxpayers are paying to lock away. Old men who served their country and are veterans because he allowed patients to grow medical marijuana on his property. Here's Roger Christie, a gentleman in Hawaii who's been in jail for over 3 years without a trial and without any bail while his mother passed away, as if he's a danger to society. His real crime? Being politically active. Just like my friend Mark Emery, who created the magazine Cannabis Culture in Canada, who's been dragged down to the United States and serving time here.
Cannabis is a religion for him, and that he's proud to spread what he calls the sacrament.
In February of 2006, the Supreme Court decided in a unanimous decision that a church in New Mexico could use DMT, dimethyltryptamine, for their religion. They could import it, distribute it, and consume it. DMT is a Scheduled I hallucinogen, the exact same scheduling as marijuana. So I consulted my attorneys. Could we distribute medical marijuana in California and be protected federally by doing it as a church? My attorneys felt so. So I looked around for a location to open Temple 420 and found an ideal spot on Hollywood Boulevard at the corner of La Brea and Hollywood. Very quickly we grew into a popular location, and we worked closely with people in the community who needed the love of God and our services. We helped women get out of prostitution and out of pornography. We even helped young people get off drugs, and some homeless teenagers on Hollywood Boulevard get home to their families where they were then going to be accepted again. I'm a stoner, not a saint, but the fact is, in the United States of America, every single person deserves to be treated equally under the law. That's what this country's about.
All these churches advertised that they were distributing marijuana. The religious freedom guaranteed by the First Amendment meant that the government can't just pass a law making your religion illegal. They actually have to show some kind of actual harm. When all these cases go to court, including mine, the government comes in and says, well, the legislature made it illegal. So that demonstrates a compelling interest in prohibiting the religious practice.
We wanted to run a medical marijuana club better by running it as a church. And marijuana is the most spiritual plant in the world. It can actually change your mind and help you to see the reality of God and His creation, how beautiful it is. And like it says in the book of Romans, it's your responsibility to know that God exists, whether you ever get to read the Bible or not, just because His creation is so incredible. And cannabis opens your eyes to that incredible creation. It makes you think about spiritual things and not so much the worldly, not so much the consumer. And that's why I believe it's so hated, because of this spiritual awareness and the spiritual awakening that comes from cannabis. And that's why we chose to open Temple 420. We wanted to reach people who were using cannabis already with the Bible and teach them about the real God, because they already smoked marijuana by the millions. The fact is, marijuana is a medicine not just for people, but it's for the healing of the nations.
It's not enough for the government to claim this is dangerous. They actually have to document some injuries. And there were no injuries in Craig's Temple 420. There were no injuries in Roger Christie's THC ministry in Hawaii. There were no injuries from Eddie Lepp, Medicinal Gardens and Ministry of Rastafari. And there were no injuries from the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church distributing marijuana for religious use. So the government just comes in and just says, we're just offended by the fact that you're using marijuana for your religion, and you all have to go to jail, and we have to take all your property, confiscate that, and donate it to the government, and you just can't do that. So again, authoritarian government without just cause interfering with the religious freedom of its citizen. That if there was existing secular use, then they would listen to that and they would apply the compelling interest test. Temple 420, he's in California, and California does allow the secular use of marijuana for medical use. They allow people to grow it, they allow caregivers to distribute it, to share it, and they allow collectives and dispensaries. And so Craig lives in a state where the Supreme Court would acknowledge that there's an existing equal protection argument in addition to the First Amendment religious freedom argument. And the same thing with Eddie Lepp, who lives in California, and the same thing with Roger, who lives in Hawaii. Is the religious use and the secular use similar enough that it would be be equal protection. And so with Craig, I think you could say it is. With Temple 420 and with Eddie Lepp, I think you could say it is. My religious freedom is being denied, and they're allowing people to use marijuana on equal terms. I want to use marijuana for religious use, and I don't want to use it I want to use it exactly the same way it's currently being used for medical use. Saying if they're going to allow people to use marijuana for medical use, and the state hasn't documented any danger to the public from that, then how could they possibly document or even claim there would be a danger involved with religious use on the same terms? If they're going to get along with sharing and using and homegrown of marijuana, then it has to be consistently applied to religious use.
Well, if Carl's right and Temple 420 did everything correctly, then what went wrong? Why am I now a convicted felon and there's thousands of other people selling marijuana in the city and county of Los Angeles? In my opinion, it's because the U.S. government is prosecuting the leaders of the cannabis industry, people who stand up and stand out trying to affect and change politics. You're allowed to sell marijuana as long as you keep your mouth shut, as witnessed by the fact that there's thousands of medical marijuana clubs or clubs selling marijuana here in the city and county of Los Angeles. Marijuana is both benign and, more importantly, it's benevolent. So why arrest the politically active? Qui bono? Who benefits? There's so much money to be made scamming the taxpayers, the American taxpayers, to run a prison industry where people who smoke marijuana are making up a larger and larger percentage of the people behind bars in private prisons. Do I belong in jail? Well, that's what this film is here to answer, and I'm asking you to judge me as my jury in the court of public opinion. Marijuana prohibition in the United States has turned our nation into a prison. We have more prisoners in this nation than in China, even though we have fewer people. We have more prisoners per 100,000 people than any other country in the history of the world. And it's all because of marijuana prohibition. Right after the raid at Temple 420, filmmaker Kevin Booth came by. He was working on his documentary film, American Drug War, that featured Gary Webb, the CIA drug dealing, the inside story on Freeway Ricky Ross. There was thousands of medical marijuana clubs opening up all around us. I never realized how naive I was. It was only 7 years ago this month that I started Temple 420, and since the arrest I've learned so much. At first I thought, oh, we'd go to court and we would win. That's why I stayed open after the arrest. I was sincere about my religion and helping people with medical marijuana. I thought for sure we would win. I never thought the courts would be unjust. But I was wrong. The courts are completely unjust. Here's the reason why I believed in them. I was arrested in 1994 for using the word bong. After graduating from UCLA, I tried to turn the marijuana world upside down by opening a hemp store on the heart of Melrose Avenue where all the movie stars went. I just didn't have much of a budget, so I started out by throwing hemp rallies and educating people as to what hemp was. At one rally, I encouraged 12,000 people to smoke marijuana at 4:20 in the afternoon. I was named High Times Freedom Fighter of the Month for the effort, but 3 days later I was arrested at my store for calling a water pipe a bong. I had started a free speech club at UCLA, so I was going to stand on principle. And thank God for Eric Shevin of Bruce Margolin's office who fought for me. This is when O.J. Simpson's trial was going on, and the judge said to my attorney, hey, this could be a tougher jury to impanel than the O.J. Simpson case. After Eric asked why, the judge said, well, we've got to find 12 people from Hollywood to say they've never smoked marijuana. That could be impossible. It was interesting because when I got arrested, the first thing they did was strip me down naked, look under my penis, under my balls, and then up my butt. And I thought the only purpose of it was to humiliate me. It was kind of to put you in a humiliating position, like you're subservient to us, kind of like the Nazis did to the Jewish people by shaving their heads and tattooing them. It was all a sign of ownership, that we own your body. We can tell you what to put in your body and what to put on your body. The point in mentioning this case is that we won. done. It actually doubled and tripled my business because people saw me as a freedom fighter standing up for their right to free speech, to call a water pipe a bong, rather than have to pretend every time they walked in the store that they didn't know what it was called. Can I have one of those? You know what I'm talking about? We made fun of this in our commercial. We actually built Bong Canyon after this and had commercials on TV. And then the tagline was, racial tension, can't we all just get a bong? There were other victories too, such as selling legal marijuana at Super Bowl 30 and helping to pass Proposition 215, medical marijuana, back in 1996. After being arrested, I arrived at Temple 420 at about 10 a.m. in the morning. A gentleman named Tony Garcia, who claimed to be an employee of LegalZoom.com, pointed out that LegalZoom was across the street from my temple. I hadn't known that fact until that moment. He said Robert Shapiro had been paying attention to my arrest and knew what was going on, and he claimed he wanted to help me. Not just any Robert Shapiro, but the Robert Shapiro who had represented O.J. Simpson and got him off of murder, now wanted to help me. Within minutes, Mr. Shapiro called me and we set up an appointment. He told me not to take my money out of the bank because it would make me look guilty. I followed his advice. In Mr. Shapiro's Century City offices, he was willing to help me for free. In fact, he said he could make the entire case go away with one phone call, as long as I was willing to give up my life savings that I had invested in the temple and all the money they had just seized, because he told me not to take the money out of the bank. I told him I wanted to fight, and he said going to trial would cost $75,000. Suddenly, not so pro bono. Since Robert Shapiro wasn't representing me, I went to the arraignment without an attorney. Fortunately, while in Superior Court, I was approached by an attorney who offered to represent me. Her name was Lachelle Woodard, and she had represented Tupac Shakur before. Not only was she an attorney, but she also was a pastor, so I retained her to represent me through trial. After several requests, she never provided me with a retainer agreement, and at the last minute, after I had discovered the videotape evidence that existed of the raid, she requested of the judge that she be allowed to quit the case, and the judge allowed that. I felt I was forced to represent myself, even though the judge tried to get me to have a public pretender represent me. I wasn't feeling comfortable about that option. I prepared for the case by studying the law and consulting with people like Carl Olson of the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church, because they had had more experience than I had. The other thing I did was review the videotapes over and over, isolating each individual person so I could understand exactly what occurred that day and why our rights had been taken away. What I learned from viewing the surveillance footage were three important things. Number one, that the police had used the offices of LegalZoom.com as their headquarters for the raid on my Temple 420. Number two, that the raid actually started early in the morning when Brett Bogue and Robert Ayala had arrived with the police officers who later arrested me. And number three, that my good friend Brett Bogue was working with, or who I thought was my good friend Brett Bogue, was working with the law enforcement agencies that eventually arrested me and seized my life savings. This is where things get weird. I confronted Robert Shapiro as to why he had solicited me as a client. He exclaimed that his partner and co-founder at LegalZoom.com, Brian Lee, had requested it, and he was simply doing him a favor. I had never met Brian Lee in my life, even though we had graduated from UCLA in the same year. I called and confronted Brian Lee with Robert Shapiro's accusation. What I discovered was that Brian Lee, Robert Shapiro, and a gentleman named Derek, who I had only met once before, co-owned a frozen yogurt shop that was right below my Temple 420. Apparently, Brian Lee claimed he was doing a favor for Derek. I had only met Derek once before in my life, and certainly never asked him to do me any favors. I didn't even know that he knew I had been arrested. Brian Lee, however, actually had to allow the police officers who arrested me access to use the LegalZoom offices to conduct their raid, because the raid was headquartered in the LegalZoom offices. So I don't believe Brian Lee's explanation that a guy named Derek, who I had met once before, requested it of him, and I believe that the call to Robert Shapiro started with Brian Lee himself, just as Mr. Shapiro claims. The fact that Mr. Shapiro solicited us because of Brian Lee doesn't subtract from the fact that it appears he was somehow involved or working with the prosecution, because he was so confident when he told us he could make the entire case go away with one phone call as long as we were willing to give up all of our assets, which is what happens in the majority of asset forfeiture cases, a person will let their assets be seized in lieu of being prosecuted. I, however, didn't feel I had done anything wrong and simply wanted my day in court. Everyone knows Robert Shapiro, but who is Brian Lee? Well, he's a lawyer and an entrepreneur.
I partnered with Robert Shapiro to start the business. With She-Dazzle, I partnered with Kim Kardashian to start it, and with Honest.com, which launches on Tuesday, I started that with Jessica Alba.
Brian Lee, you dropped something, like a name.
Oh, absolutely.
Joking aside, the actions of Brian Lee and Robert Shapiro resulted in my assets being seized and me being unable to afford a private attorney. The night I was arrested, I contacted Bruce Margolin, who suggested I take all my money out of the bank and hire him as my attorney immediately. The following morning, when I was solicited by Robert Shapiro and told that he would represent me pro bono, which means free, I decided not to take Bruce Margolin's advice and to take the advice of the more famous Robert Shapiro. That was a mistake. It was equally a mistake hiring an attorney who turned out to be a full-time employee of the federal government. What was not a mistake was starting Temple 420. I wish I had hired Bruce Margolin, famous marijuana attorney, to represent me. And I certainly wish Brian Lee had turned down the police who asked to use LegalZoom.com as the headquarters for the raid on Temple 420. I feel as if that cost me an opportunity to have a fair trial. In November of 2008, while filming an episode for Louis Black's comedy show, I finally ran into Derek at Cantaloupe Frozen Yogurt. I asked him about calling Brian Lee to ask if Robert Shapiro could call me. He said he hadn't even heard that I had been arrested and wondered why we had closed. He was looking forward to having a medical marijuana club above his frozen yogurt shop because he thought the two would be a great pair. Based upon my ability to read people, it appeared Derek was being sincere and that Brian Lee was being less than honest. There is a counterintelligence program, a government-run COINTELPRO, against the religious use of marijuana. I am trying to lay out the circumstantial evidence as to why I personally was prosecuted and as to why leaders in the marijuana industry, and specifically the religious aspect of marijuana, are being prosecuted, jailed, persecuted, and in some cases murdered. Hemp, marijuana, cannabis? What's so important about this plant? Let me tell you, it is the world's #1 most important natural resource. It's food, fuel, fiber, clothing, shelter, medicine. Not only that, it is the center of some people's spiritual life. Just ask Snoop Lion or Bob Marley. So why don't more people get it?
The general public is in a suspended disbelief, daydreaming medical trance. There is an ad on the back for HempUSA.com. You know, we don't like the fact that he's pushing marijuana. Incredible health benefits being patented, and drug companies are coming out with it the last 15 years. I mean, it's a fact. This is the most wondrous plant in the world. It is a miracle drug. And George Washington smoked marijuana, hemp. George Washington grew the rope hemp, the sail hemp, but he also grew the stuff that they put you in jail for. It makes better clothes than cotton, produces all different types of oil, machine oil, hundreds of products. They just had it banned. We're the only country in the world you cannot grow industrial hemp. It's got so many uses it'll make your head spin.
So how do you ban the world's #1 most important natural resource?
Everybody's heard of reefer madness, where it shows people going crazy when they smoke marijuana. The evil Hispanics, Mexicans smoke it and turn into devils, so they used racism and fear of the unknown. That DuPont, Dow Chemical, on record in the early 30s, wanted polyester to come out. Hemp was incredibly popular. You can grow it anywhere. It made better stuff than even cotton, and it was also used to produce all different types of oil, machine oil, hundreds of products. They just had it banned. I'm not bad or weird or sick because I'm informed.
The first of many coincidences started when I got the discovery from the prosecution. The discovery tells you what they're going to use to prosecute you with, what evidence they have. The first thing I noticed, which was a big coincidence, was one of the police officers involved in the raid. His name was Tony Garcia. Okay, that was the same name as the guy who came to me and said he was an employee for LegalZoom.com and that Robert Shapiro wanted to help me. I then called LegalZoom.com and I verified if they had a Tony Garcia working there. No, never had, never did. So, obviously someone who wasn't working for LegalZoom.com approached me in the parking lot the day after I was first arrested in 2006 to get me to have Robert Shapiro as my attorney. Robert Shapiro may not have been in on the conspiracy to begin with, but when he told me he could make my whole case go away with one phone call, obviously he had talked to the prosecution. You don't make those kind of claims without having some kind of connection to the prosecutor, unless he just had huge balls and felt he was that great of an attorney. When I was approached in court by Lachelle Woodert, I really thought she could help me. She was a pastor. I went and saw her at church. She turned out to be a full-time employee of the federal government working for the Veterans Administration, and the Veterans Administration actually has some legal duties to fight the drug war. The drug war, which in all realities is a war on marijuana, since most of the people in jail for drugs are in there for marijuana, 85% of all people arrested for drugs are arrested for marijuana, and the way they make it look like not everyone in jail is for marijuana is they don't put you in jail for marijuana, they give you probation, and then they say you violated your probation. The way you violate your probation is by having contact with police officers, any contact, even if you don't break the law, and that's how they were able to add years and years onto my probation. They gave me, the judge in the trial court gave me permission to reopen. So I reopened on Robertson Boulevard. I opened as the Beverly Hills Green Cross. I didn't want to reopen as Temple 420. But they came after me again for Mickey Mouse little things. And they said, oh, you didn't have the right permit, even though I had the proper permits. And even though I was one of the first medical marijuana shops in Los Angeles, they said, oh no, your permit is a temporary permit. So I had to close for 6 weeks, and they only closed my shop. Out of all the other shops that had temporary permits, I was one of the few that was closed. So I closed for 6 weeks to follow the rules, and then on October 19th, the judge in Los Angeles ruled that the temporary permits were unconstitutional. So I went and applied for a new permit that day and got it. Also that day, President Obama and Eric Holder said, we're not going to go after states that are legally operating in their states, so I didn't worry about the feds. So I reapplied for my permit as Temple 420, and my attorney, Brett Rubin, contacted Asha Greenberg of the city of Los Angeles, said I was going to open, and she emailed back saying we're not going to pursue permit issues. 2 days later, and it came out in court that Asha Greenberg sent the cops in 2 days later, so she basically just lied to my attorney, and they arrested me on a permit issue. When they realized I had a proper permit issue, they said I abused a child, tried to take my children away from me. It was a child from my church who I had taken downtown to buy a suit because his suits at church were too small on him. And I know the wholesale district very well, so I bought him a suit. When he was at my temple and church, it was broken into 2 different buildings. On one side was my wife's t-shirt shop. On one side was my medical marijuana club. The kid was in the t-shirt shop. The police lied and said he was in the medical marijuana club. Finally, the judge said, well, even if he was in the medical marijuana club, to abuse a child, it has to be to bring him near death, to endanger him means to put him in a life-threatening situation. The judge said, well, obviously marijuana isn't a life-threatening situation, so he dropped the charges. Well, then they said I violated my probation. So they simply, dropped all the charges, but said a probation violation and added years onto my probation, which means that I can have a probation officer come into my house at any time, go through any one of my drawers, my children's drawers, my woman's drawers, go through her panties, anything. At 24 hours a day, I have no right to privacy anymore. Because basically what happens once I was arrested was the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, was taken from me. These God-given rights that aren't supposed to be taken from anyone. Okay? And these are the First Amendment, the right to freedom of religion, free press, freedom of assembly, and free speech. I'm not allowed to freedom of my religion. My church was, I was arrested at my church. My church has been shut down twice, all with no due process, without telling the judge in the warrant that I was even a church. U.S. citizens have a right to keep and bear arms. I don't, as a convicted felon, as part of my agreement. I'm not allowed to have a gun to protect myself anymore, even though I've been threatened by the police, and the police are still trying to have me killed. The government may not force itself, in the Third Amendment, may not quarter soldiers in your house. Well, it should be any agent of the government. I'm allowed to have, or the government's allowed to have, my probation officer come in my house 24 hours a day and do anything he wants to me or my family. This is how disgusting our country has become. We've become a third world country where you have absolutely no rights. The Fourth Amendment is supposed to protect you from unreasonable search and seizures. Now, I'm not complaining saying I'm the only one who's lost all these rights, because the fact is, no one in America has these rights anymore. You, as an American citizen, no longer have the right not to have yourself searched and seized without probable cause, because the government can listen to you on your telephone, they can go through your emails and do all sorts of other things. So this Bill of Rights has been shredded in front of you. Okay, the Fifth Amendment says you're not supposed to be able to incriminate yourself. Well, I have to get naked with my penis and balls and show it to my probation officer anytime he calls me in, and piss in a cup in front of him, which means I'm incriminating myself without any reasonable due process. They don't have to suspect me of having done drugs. I'm already suspected of it. I'm not even allowed to leave my house without papers saying I'm a convicted drug felon and I'm on probation. A U.S. citizen should have a right to a fair and speedy trial, but once you post bail, you're pretty much waiving your right. Well, you're not incarcerated, so you've given up your right to a speedy trial. So unless you keep yourself in jail until trial, that right to speedy trial is worthless. It's gone, okay? The Seventh Amendment, a right to trial by jury. These aren't a jury of your peers. Okay, they go through them and they pick people who've never smoked marijuana. Half the people, when they first put them in the jury, they said, why would we convict anyone for marijuana in California? Here comes another helicopter over my house. This is what happens when you live in a crappy neighborhood. I've lost all my money. I've lost my cars, my house, everything. And I don't care anymore because they're all worldly things. I have my health. That's the most important. But I don't even... Here's the whole point. The Eighth Amendment of the Constitution says you're supposed to not have cruel and unusual punishment. Anytime you punish someone, steal their money, or put them in jail, strip them naked, look up their butt, under their penis, under their balls for flowers, for growing, selling, or smoking flowers, that's cruel and unusual. George Washington did the same thing. That's why I'm so sickened by this freaking country that our rights have gone out the window. I'm trying to keep composure, but I feel like Alex Jones on Piers Morgan's show. I'm freaking pissed, and I'm tired of living in a fascist country. And I hope my video not only shows you that I was innocent, because the only woman who testified against me was a member of my church. I wasn't even allowed to show that in court. Denied. I wasn't allowed to mention the Constitution, the California State Constitution, the Bill of Rights. I wasn't even allowed to quote the Bible. It was just so unbelievable. I wasn't allowed to mention federal law. Anyways, you don't have a Bill of Rights anymore. You don't have a Constitution. Tracy Fields, the woman who testified against me, she had to have a detective in there signaling her answers while she was on the stand so she could get the answers right, and she still couldn't get them right. She lied, and I could prove she lied with my video. But the judge said I wasn't allowed to show my video to the jury because I wasn't a video expert. But my video shows she lies. She said she wasn't there early in the morning. She was. She's on video. She said they lied about Brett Bogue and Robert Ayala. I wasn't even part of the discovery. In the discovery, they told me that 2 of the guys leading the whole operation were Corona police officers. I went to Corona, looked up the police officers. They weren't them. That's how disgusting and corrupt our courts are. They'll lie. They'll cheat. They'll steal. All so they can continue to steal your money with asset forfeiture. Why is marijuana so dangerous? Why is the church so dangerous? Why is running a marijuana church, providing medical marijuana, which is legal, so dangerous to these people? I'll explain it to you. Marijuana is the key to defeating the New World Order. It's the key to defeating globalism, okay? You're all losing your rights anyways. That Bill of Rights, the Constitution, it doesn't mean crap because you can't even mention it in a court. A judge can say, no, not relevant. You can't even mention it, okay? What does the New World Order want? They want you dependent, and they want you in a global system where each country produces one thing, so you have to depend on all the other countries to get your stuff. Marijuana makes you independent. It's food, clothing, medicine, shelter. It's everything. It's like Alex Jones said. It's the greatest plant in the history of the world. The protein alone from the seed is more digestible, meaning you can get more protein out of the seed than any other natural source of protein on the planet. The way the omegas are lined up, omegas this, omegas that. I'm not an expert in that field. I just know that it's food and I eat it all the time. I buy it at Whole Foods. And here's what my suggestion is for defeating the globalist. It isn't going to be getting upset. It isn't going to be ranting and raving. It isn't going to be shooting people up like Christopher Dorner. It's taking a marijuana seed, a simple seed, and growing it, planting marijuana everywhere. I love marijuana because you can sell it and make some money dealing weed. Marijuana is the key to an entrepreneurial, successful life. So if you want to make money and you don't have a lot of money, what you do is you put a seed in the ground, the next thing you know, boom, you got a plant. It's this big. You see them paying $5,000 a pound for lettuce? No, me, I got a plant. Marijuana, that's the plan. How long has this plant been around? 8,000 years ago. People were using it to make clothes. Marijuana is actually good for you. So I'll tell you why I love cannabis. Because hot chicks smoke cannabis. I got 2 words for the government. Kiss my ass. Okay, that's 3 words, but I don't care because either way, I'm smoking cannabis because I love it. It's great. The government doesn't want you to have anything that's great. Why? Because the government sucks. But marijuana, that's great. That's why I love it. I love everything about it. And I got 2 words for the government. Suck balls. I believe God created cannabis when he created all the plants on the planet. It's for all people to use. One of the reasons I think I'm a threat to the government is because I have a sense of humor. Whether it comes to religion or politics, I think the best way to reach people is with humor. The Granddaddy Purple, the sour, super sour diesel, and man, that's super sour. Euphoria, we have a wonderful customer named Judy who loves that. Purple Urkel, Daddy Kush, Triple X Hindu Kush, God's Gift, Super Afghani, and then we have the Platinum Bubba, the Super Silver Haze, ooh, that's one of my personal favorites, and then the True OG, that's what we just smoked upstairs. It's patient, you guys. All right, we'll be right there. Thanks. The fact is, this is our temple. Your body's your temple. So we use Wheaties. We get up every morning and wake and bake. We use the cannabis medicine and then we improve our bodies physically by da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. These guys just smoked 6 bowls of medical marijuana and now they're in training.
Our records reveal you've been having too much fun.